This is the first video in the Korg Trinity sequencing tutorial series. And to start off with, I want to familiarize you with the sequencing section, and specifically the page 1 or P1 of the sequencer. You can get to this section by clicking on the sequence button or SEQ button, and it defaults to show up in the P1 page. You can see here at the top. You also have a P2 through 8 that's available, and I'll explain those further in later videos. But in this video, I just want to touch base and kind of give you an overview of some of the controls in P1 and how this affects the sequencer or sequencing mode. Now, sequencing in the Korg Trinity, this is going to be the area where you're going to record notes and layer tracks and add effects and effectively arrange your whole composition or your whole workpiece as you construct a song. Also, there's some other features in sequence mode that will allow you to set up playlists and link songs together for other features that you might use at some point. Okay, so the first tab that we have showed up here is the track 1 through 8 tab, and this basically allows you to control some parameters for tracks 1 through 8. You also have tracks 9 through 16 with the 9 through 16 tab here at the bottom. Here at the top you have a time area or measure section, and this is where you're going to get a real-time display of where you're at in your song as far as location is concerned. You also have a drop-down list here of where you can choose different songs. If you select a blank area here, it'll ask if you want to create a new song here, and of course you can add as many songs as you like. The next area down selects the track that you're controlling or that you're effectively playing on. It's default to track 1. If you wanted to add in a recorded section for track 2, you would increment this to track 2, and of course then you would be controlling whatever voice assignment you have on track 2. Next, you have a setting that's normally set to record, and this is going to allow you to set a resolution for the notes that are played. This is sort of like a real-time quantization for these notes. If you set this to record, you can select any of these note values here, and that will allow those notes that are played to snap into the grid of the song. You also have a checkbox here for multi-record, and that's going to allow you to record more than one track at a time based on which MIDI channel is controlling those tracks. It's default for MIDI channel 1 to control track 1 and MIDI channel 2 to control track 2. But sometimes you may have a section set up where you're playing more than one track at a time. If you copy over a combi which has up to 8 tracks, you may be controlling more than one track. So if you wanted to use a sound that layered more than one sound, you might select that multi-record checkbox right there. This is a good point too, to point out the copy from combi and copy from program commands. These are the two main commands here from the drop-down list in the upper right hand corner, and you also have the delete song command, which is going to erase the current song that you have selected here in the song select section. But if you use the copy from song command, it's going to allow you to copy tracks either from another song, or if you use the copy from combi, it's going to allow you to copy the parameters from a combi into your sequencer. So if you have a sound or a combi set up, let's say in bank A, let's say 05, and you copy those to tracks 1 through 8, now all of your program parameters and effect settings will be copied in to those tracks. Okay, the next section down is the bank and program row, and you'll see here there's the ability to select A through B, and if you have the MOS board installed or the Trinity Plus version, you can select from C there, from S there as well. And that allows you to select the bank and the bank or the program or combi number that you're working with, and you can dial those in there. And next down you have a pan control, and all of these can be changed in real time, by the way. If you're effectively recording with track 1 and you're adjusting this pan as you record, these real-time settings will be recorded along with the track, which is a really handy feature. It allows you to do some automated mixing in the Korg Trinity. Also, you have a volume slider, and if you hold down on that, you will be able to pull up a value slider there, or you can, with it highlighted, you can adjust this with the shuttle control. And also at the bottom here, as with many multi-hard disk recorders or PC programs, you have a play, mute, and a record setting that you can set up there. If you're soloing a track, you can mute out all of the tracks and just play the one you want to hear. When you press record in the sequencer, that will automatically turn into record based on whatever track you have selected here. So that's kind of like an automated feature, but otherwise you can leave those to play or mute those. Next over, let's jump over to the Mix 1 through 8 tab. Of course, this is identical to the Mix 9 through 16 tab. It's just controlling tracks 1 through 8. This is where you're going to control how your track will be sent through the effects processor section. You can assign it to take on the parameters of the program, which is going to be a default value based on what those values are set to in the program in program mode, or you can select the value of 0 through 127. And send 1 and send 2, that's going to relate to whatever the send routing is set up in your mixer settings in the Insert Effects and Master Effects section. And I'll explain that a little bit later, but just for now, remember this is where you're going to control some of the routing for those associated tracks. You also have the ability here to hide oscillator 2. As you know, the Trinity uses the HI2 synth engine, which has 2 oscillators per program. And as we get into programming or program editing or sound editing in the sound editing tutorial video, this will make a little bit more sense, but you have the ability to effectively cut off the second oscillator, and that will change your program. In most cases it will thin out the program just a little bit, so you have a little bit of control over the sounds as far as affecting their thickness and tonal qualities here in sequence mode without changing those sounds in program mode. So that's another handy feature. And also you have a force poly, which is going to, let me toggle back here, this is going to force that oscillator to play as a polysynth even if the program is set to mono. Over here on the far right we have a Preferences tab. Let's go ahead and click on this. In the Preferences tab, this is where you're going to adjust your recording preferences for the sequencer. Again, all the controls from here on up are the same for all other tabs, but if we go down to the next row here, you'll see metronome, and it's set to pre-count of 2. If you highlight that there, you can adjust that, or you can take it all the way out, and that's going to change how much or how many measures the metronome will click before the recording begins. Most people will go ahead and leave that till 2, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a chance to get a feel for what the tempo is before you start recording. So with real-time recording, that's really handy. Also, you have some busing options for this metronome. It's set to left and right, and this is the outputs 1 and 2 on the Korg Trinity that you'll most likely be using for recording. You'll either patch that into your mixer and use those two outputs in either a hard disk recording application or a hard disk recorder. But you also have the ability to bus the metronome or the click track out these other sends here in order to be isolated in case, let's say you were in a studio environment and on the recording that you were preparing to record, let's say you didn't want that click track to be played on the track that you were setting up to record, so you might bus those out differently there. But for just home use and working with songs, just with the Korg Trinity as a standalone production tool, you'd probably just go ahead and leave that to left right. It's not going to affect anything as far as just you hearing the click track alone before you start a recording. And of course the click track will not be played through whenever you press play to preview what you just recorded. And also the click track won't be recorded into the Trinity's sequencer or any of the tracks as well, so you don't have to worry about that. Also, you have a level adjust here, and this just controls the relative volume of that metronome in comparison with the other audio tracks that are playing. Sometimes you may turn this up or turn it down depending on which part of a song that you're working with. If you've constructed a groove that you have a pretty decent drum track to play along with, and you just more or less want to hear the metronome in the beginning so you can get ready to record, and then maybe you want it to be drowned out once the drums play, you might adjust this down a little bit. So that's there for you. Also, there's a row next here, it's called Next Song, and if you check this box here, this will allow you to cue another song to play once this song is finished, or the song that you're working on. As it comes to the last measure, it will continue on and play to the song that you choose here. You can default for it to go to the next song, or you can select any song that you have loaded into the sequencer. You can also select the current song that you're on, so the song will continue to play again, which is sometimes a handy feature if you're working on an extended mix, or if you're doing some type of background music for different settings or performance purposes. Next down you have a recording setup section, and in the recording setup area, this is where you're going to define how your Trinity will record as you're doing the record operation in the sequencer. You have the ability to select overwrite, and these are radio buttons, by the way. You can select just one at a time here. If it's set to overwrite, this is going to overwrite any measures that you're recording into in real time. And this will probably be how you record in the Trinity most of the time. You'll be working on a part and you'll record something, and you might not like how it sounds or the way that you played it, so you might go ahead and record over that section, and it's going to erase any notes that were recorded previously and only just record the ones that you're currently working on. If you set this to overdub, it's going to do just the opposite. It's going to add the notes that you are currently recording to the notes that you past recorded. Sometimes this is a handy feature though too if you're working on a drum track. Sometimes when people are programming drums, they may put in the bass and the snare first and then go back and overdub or over-record the hi-hats and cymbals. So there's a couple good uses for both of those operations. Next over you have a section called Auto Punch In. And Auto Punch In is a familiar feature that you'll see in a lot of hard disk recording applications and standalone units, of where you define the areas in the song of where the recording will take place. Let's say you've constructed an entire song, and let's say somewhere in the middle of the song, say measure 45 through 55, you have an area where you want to plug in a solo. You might go in there and you might dial in the measures of where that solo will take place, and then go back and record that section. And this is going to allow you to dial in any location in the song. Let's say you might dial into measure 30 and press record, and up until the point that it reaches measure 45, it will not record any notes that are played. But then once it hits 45, anything that you record within that measure range is going to be recorded into the track assignment that you're on. And also you have a loop feature, and this is another handy feature that's in a lot of sequencers, and this is especially handy for recording drums as well. You may take a certain section, say measure 1 through 4, and this will effectively loop that area of the song continuously until you hit stop. So this is handy if you want to record just the bass or maybe the bass drum of a drum track, and as it loops through again you might record just the snare of a drum track, and as it loops through again you might record just the tambourine or some hi-hats or something like that, and each time that you loop around you'll be able to add those sections that you record. There's also a manual punch in, and this is pretty handy if you use a foot switch. You can plug this into the switch, and the instant that you press the switch it will start recording. So this is handy for a lot of live performance or live recording as well, and it kind of frees up a lot of the constraints of loop recording or auto punch in. Also, this is where you're going to adjust the fast forward and rewind speeds of the sequencer. There's the fast forward and rewind buttons above the sequencer controls of the record write and stop start buttons, and you can adjust this to be anywhere from 1 to 4 times the tempo speed, and most of the time I'd go ahead and just leave that to 2. It's the most practical fast forward and rewind speeds when you're normally working on a project. Okay, this concludes the overview for the P1 or page 1 page of the sequencer. In later tutorials we'll explore the other functions in the sequencer and get into some recording and effects setups.